Tanyo Jimbo La Nebo Joje Zinje Damje Dewa Dan Deve Jodan Debar Joje Dongar Je Jodan Rawa Joje Dongar Mebe Dewa Damba Dama Rawa Joje Nyere Nidan Rarve Danyo Jimbo La Nebo Joje Simje Damje Dewa Dan Deve Jodan Debar Joje Dongar Dan Dongar Je Jodan Rawa Joje Dongar Mebe Dewa Damba Dama Rawa Joje Nyere Jodan Nidan Rarve
Tanyam Jambola
Nebar Joje Dada Simje Damje Lo Juzan Rovara Zinje Labda Zo Jilamda Rovara Zinje Labda Zo Lam Turba Zavara Zinje Labda Zo Turba Yigi Zan Javara Zinje Labda Zo Dada Zimje Damje Lo Juzan Rovara Zinje Labda Zo Jilamda Rovara Zinje Labda Zo Lanturba Zavara Zinje Labda Zo Turba Yigi Zan Javara Zinje Labda Zo Dada Zimje Damje Lo Juzan Rovara Zinje Labda Zo Jilam Zinje Labda Zo Lanturba Zavara Zinje Labda Zo Turba Yigi Zan Javara Labda Zo Ayan Zen Yoge Ngedanye Beman Yone Yizadang Godang Roman Buk Kunzang Lama Dage Jawara Beme de John Kajin Jimbo Gone Jizon Yen Gozon Dojeng Dardo Zo Min Jeje Yenje Borana Duzon Zanje Gunje Ngoni Razen Jugan Azan Donzebe Tsave Lama Namla Guzan Zanje Gung Tsave Lama La Gozan Guva Jimbu Zorande Dominelo Rangon Drubada Tsinder Draba Nyambara Zenje Lo Juba Zemje Jo Jidundri Nyamdan Dobe Yonde Bamda Ye Sanjimana Tembe Jamzinze Londo Jamzin Yavla Guzan Zazan Gundun Zoji Lamadan Rezan Truptu Jimin Nipjinji Kande Jimru Dijin Raga Barve Dorji Kyabla Zorwande Rana Dondro Nije Dabjinve Kota Kyenga Nange Tsilabe Renzen Namje Gomba Nganjo Yo Ola Sutini Da Terenge Kapso Yang Da Tanyeren Kana Yoyobe Tini Chudon Nambala Tsamala Ngarange Simta Hajang Nyawak Toni Tanga Zon Mutaring Bola Kasa Kala Yori de Simta de Hajang Neja Nyawak Toni Tini Ngarange Tsamala Shoba Dele Hiat You
Regardless of the physical distance that may be between us at this time and under these current circumstances, all my Dharma friends, we are very, very close in our hearts. And with that understanding in mind, I want to begin by wishing you all a very good morning.
Tetan Linda Deni Namkwada Nyambe Simjin Tamji Tende Lana me Bayan Dabar Zobo Sanji, Gompa Rumbochi, Tasong Nasok Mizak Zo Teri, Chunyamni Sea, the Mizak Zo, San Zobo Sanji, Gompa Rumbochi, Gutsin Denila Tope, Chida, Dag Dari Tambi Chusam Kangi, Surgeon the Sine, Simba Zamji Matsi, Don Yamseline, Teni tarto namji zobu sanje jo kombaron boje tope chi to ta tereng ke chute sinya ta drovya se ke yen samne ke kolong number tapo goni sinja ta te gen do chunin be kumju dang denba goni ta kumju nu ji johnson tama tong man zen ba la so ba mambo che yo ri te ta chama jeb tu wen hi ma go wa ke thoni chama ke tan chin yin ba ri te thoni teni sem tse chek da mayen ba ne teni sin ro nan hyo kin
Our principal purpose in every dharma activity is our desire, our bodhicitta, to bring all beings throughout space to the state of perfect Buddhahood in this current life. And it is for that reason that we hear a profound and holy Dharma, and we don't just hear it, we actually practice it. So please approach this with that pure motivation and other aspects of the approach, such as avoiding the 6 stains of an unfit vessel and so on, which I don't need Lama said to explain in detail because you've all heard about this before.
Ori ta ten de ta tereng kaps ta pecha wen kan yo ma ringa la kan kharmi te ngarang ke semtho ni ten zabla ma la che che do soran dem ne koncho kundi ju ngo zabla ma la che che do soran dem ne ten ngarang ka kan khi khi go ne ko number ta bo go ni ten hyo ke yin ta tereng ke hyobza ke zon ra wo te nga so ngim jong zo ni hi yo ri ta ngim jong se ya de me to marong wa te nga so ke tambe chu drop go ni me to rang marong wa ra wo de ko thong ri teni ko thong de ta zo de lo do number ye go ni he je de ke chen bo ri teni ten de lo do number ye de ta kare se ne nga so yang ko re kha de ko ke ya ze hi de a zo ba chen bo ne tong ro le ke ja hi ke yo ri ko re kha de ma chen ba m dun ko lo do number ye ne yang ja ra ko ba po go yan ra wo de ke ja hi de je kare ye na sa na de ma ri nga so tartok songjo dorjin chang ko pa ma thap ki part ko lo do number ye de nyama ta ba lo jang go lo jang ne ngim jong ko ngim ba jong ko lo do number ye lan ko wa de xian ba lo de ne ma da ba ju le ji tam jo ni ka wa ngo hi ma da ba ju le ji ko wa le ngim jong ten da li jin je ko ji go ho le de chi to lo do number ye de nam ye na lo ne por mrong wa he nam ye na te lo jang go wa he ke ten ru ke ri o le ri ten lo do number ye de lo le ba ri ke jang ma tham ne song na ten chu yang da ba ke sem to la je to ka ma ri chu yang da ba ke sem to la ma ji na ten ne kap zang nga so che chu ban de yan do ne kap zang na se na ten te deep ra wo deng sabon ra wo sem ju le je deng sabon ra wo chu de ha ko deng sabon ra wo chu de drop go ya ge ji ji ka re yan ba de cha si de chang go ya de ka re yan ba de za wa ni ha ko ta ko ma re te ha ko ma ta cha de po go gomba ja ba na gi re po go gomba jam na gomba ko re sam so gomba ya bo ja ka re den sam so kon ri khor ka re ri da ko te kap so ne ka re te kap so la kang ba cha la ba cha se ba re then the coral load number yet nga so tu nam da yang me to marong ba ye yam ba cha ni te nga so gan de hi go le ri jing ni de sa ni nga so da le dang bo ba kha sa de ne tra tho le view se ba ri nam ba san je bu chu la nyam ni zong ke le dang bo ba ta ba ko lo ma ge ba jang jang ri yo ma ri nyam ni ge chu si zar zo so jang jang ri yo ma ri de ne sa ba ma bo le ko le ri then the corolodo number yade mixer the gondo ngarang ke sam no re tin khorne the program de dipari te machi le ke ta ke ne tang di kap so nanyeng ge lo ta lo cheng ro hol ri di kap so nga so ke zambal leng ta ko kien ro sok cha sanu jin jik tin nang ju ji sim ji tham ji lan jarwa ka che san ro so nga so ke hi ta hi yem ba kang dong har nyong yem ba kang di tho de ni ko no do number yade che hi na yang ndikbonda limbonda yabonda osari samba ke thoni kolong te chi ne nga so gandi program de ta da ka kapsula Kunzang Palchen Ling na dibari ti thoni ma shokari.
I'm not going to be using a specific text this weekend. I'm going to be talking, as you would put it, off the cuff, straight from my heart. So I'm going to continuously pray one-pointedly to my root guru, the embodiment of all of the three jewels, and we'll hope for the best. The determination to be free is our chosen topic. And there are general and specific reasons for our choice. The general reason is that it is essential. Without the determination to be free, we cannot and will not authentically travel the path of dharma. This determination to be free is traditionally cultivated consciously by us, primarily through contemplation of what are called the four turnings of the mind, or the four thoughts that turn the mind, or the four reminders. Now, most of you have received a considerable instruction on the topic of the four reminders. And so you may be asking the question, oh no, why this again? Sometimes he flies up into the sky and talks about the great perfection, and then sometimes he just swoops back down to the ground and bores us again with all this talk of the four thoughts. What's going on? Well, it's not so much a matter of being sporadic or capricious. It's simply that we need to be constantly reminded of our basic purpose. We need to be constantly reminded of the need to maintain and grow and reinforce our desire to be free. Because without this, real dharma is impossible. Without a sincere desire to be free, we may look like we're practicing dharma, but there will be no depth in it. Our dharma practice won't be deep. And our attempt to walk on the path of dharma will be like the faltering and possibly dangerous steps of an infant who was just learning to walk and who is as likely to fall down and hurt themselves as they are to get anywhere. Those are the general reasons. Now, more specifically, there are two. One is that some of you who are listening this weekend will probably be quite new to Dharma. And therefore, it is my responsibility to clearly explain these four thoughts so that you can start out informed and with a healthy desire for freedom. The other specific reason is that over this past year, we have all witnessed and experienced, to varying degrees, but in every case, so much change, so much suffering. There is a saying, if life hands you lemons, make lemonade, and that's what we're going to do this weekend. We're going to take advantage of our seemingly endless experience this year of impermanence, change, and suffering. So it is for those reasons, both general and specific, that we've decided here at Kunzang Palchen Ling to have a weekend seminar on this topic.
어때리 따텐데 당가랑게 고잔네 간히히가 거니 시에케인 데니텐데 데라 체바당 라바당 노르와당 트르와당 초바당 공로 노르와당 책주 마다발라소바강 송아탐지 데니 인교자와 세동 제바탐지 조섬 드봉오보 데니 자블라마리 도르진 체보드 체모탐지긴 등등하는 게 샤바혀그인 데니 대안하기 다 나랑게 다른게 콜로도 남바제데 마시니 갑슬라 데니 참마 센네 지보당 가보당 태보당 공원 trực 보당 등죽 송네 데니 핀토 종점 송나 데 송아데 데니 대안 나인게 인의 요비자와 세동 제바 탐지 조선 드봉오 자블라마다 대안하기 소소가 도르지 체보던 체모 탐지게 라 나랑 추반버긴 어때리 데니 당 다다게 네 당아서 콜로도 넘버 예세야데 마효네 갑솔라 땡아서 다저 코니 추바데 콜홍 특파 침보 산초그 셈지 지스바데 고리 세야데 따데페 개침보리 따데 산초그 셈세야데 당아서 디 심지 세야데라 다 심지 넘버 니가 고니 가서 삼노 땅거들인데 갑솔라 데니 삼바자체와 산초 셈지 고홍당 탑자체와 상하지 고홍 니가 고니 지스바르게 토니 데냠니 조고들이 데네 대안하게 삼바자체와 산초 셈지 고홍 세야데 다 산초 셈지 고홍 세야데 산초 삼바침보 세야데라 노나 쿠바 침보 셈자 침보 로코 침보 거양보 다 든르게 포모 서예나 요바데라 산초게 셈게 긴 차코들이 데인데 다던 코로네베 셈진 탐지 랑게 토마메베 드네 파마 마제바 찍장미 파마 세베 드서 세제 푸세 구제 제요 데니 현도 삼베 다당아서고 파마가 부주를 간데세게 요바 나이 파마연난다 로보 조모 제와 침보연난다 대하나이 현도 제와 침보고네 데니 세제 푸세 구제 제요 현도 삼베 지생부 전지 하다인 전지 하다리 전 침보진 그 하다장자 나서 그 디틀린데 틀린 수고레면서 틀린 롱저세야 메리 나서다 나서 디 나바산제바 그 춘냠스 림바 갑스 데니 오 데인데 현도 삼베 지생부 전지 하다인라 전지 대다 탐지게 네바데 가레르 너저 대와 코나 너콜레면서 동하리 째장 동키 타나 버생 조마 속차인지 요마리 참마 데베치드 조콜레 데인데 겐더 쳔버게 송올레리 조마 맹미 데베치드 조 삼버강미 데베치드 조 노르던 직딩 캄나 방드네 찍라 찡투 데베치드 조소 데와레 너바게 돈데 조콜레리 동하른 너장 동하르지 조 게와 조콜레리다 게와데다 드당 하고 말이 먹게와죠 빵고들 먹게와죠 레겐도 빵당 하고 말이 대인도 런히 몽대도다 로몽 돈로나 ing아서 찬데요들 대인도 게베죠 고 데베죠 게와 동하르 만데부터도 저거 동하르 저 데베 먹게와 빵고래 대빵 메히 다 예건 너저당 라게 렌저니 선절로던 존로거든 카카차로거든 데니 람로 고몽스처 발롱아 탕저들르바서 람로 고몽 세리아데 마 뉴욕 사장 로거나 야보스종 조선나 이린도거 람로 고몽스처 바 롱아 탕저들르바세 탕침보 힝나저 가야 메바 탕침보 저다 롱아르 맹메바르 머릉 오효라 근데 고 간론들로 히마 샬론나자 대하나 영아서 차 되어래 대자와 마긴 심진다다 담지 샤르체 자 닝르지 삼 샤자 닝지 제메바르게 유르 제네 데네 로도나게 로장고리 샤르자 닝르지 삼네 다게 따르 담비 추사모 드바데 대담지 마긴 대다 담지 산제 극사를 꿰베치다 땅에 드럼네 산 로도나게 대레 로장네 산 마도 나랑게 돈도멘 나랑 찍보도 삼도 동야 미는 가서 다다 특바 진보가 람냠슬리는 로고리 혁체규된 보준 남부 주주다 근데 특바 진보 냠슬리는 로홀 특바 진보도 상하 냠슬리는 던제 대인데 대고홀리 가서 대냠네 세고리 대인데 대라 탑자제와 상하지 걸롱 세리아데 지선바게 토니 로고는 더드바키나 마리 탑자 삼바자제와 산초스미제 걸롱 세리아데 대 대하나게 그 탑자제와 상하지 걸롱 세리아데라 대레 르바 노사들이 대 왕보 nombo 왕세는 하지 특바 제발 파서는 가서 희가 여러와 대달리 진짜 까와 침보 지 먹어봐 람타 현대내자 녀와 다 가르리세나 고원에 전에 인직디 감다다 담지 다부 형한 거 나와라 파 연도네 되네 고 포모 담지 고 랑예가네 파워단 컨트롤 연네 내여 담지 대하나게 소소가 라마데 송조 도르진장 의서 삼노 동네 산지 동 산지에 근두히 산지 조부 산지 의선 두히 라마를 요네 제 객도 도르진 제보 쳔모던지도 빠원 칸로 코나로 삼노 동도네 람장도 람 텔르더 다녀와라게 든리케가 상하가 람 제조거로 탑자제와 상하지 거통 다 든리케가 고네 오리 대단 dom바저야로 조체리 추나 담지 진든 dom바젤라 랍더 네젤나 dom바저야로 샘 코랑게 삼노 제조거로 르바 배 하장게 친 통보 르바 정보 르바 장보고 포모 담지게 대라냠슬린제 상하이 추리 존 디토닌 로홀리 다디 삼바 걸론 넘버 2 삼바 자체와 산초스미제 걸론도 탑자체와 상하제 걸론 니그 코니 지선바다 가롱기 토니 코니 지선바게 토니 되는 가서게 대나니 조다다데 삼바 자체와 산초스미제 걸론 그 토티니 가서게 다 로도 넘버게데 다 장탐나 되니 고 레겐데 삼노 땅탐나 되니 고 따장볼 가섭 tre바나기 베 할레바케게 되니 고 쳐저걸 소소라 냠နေတာ소소가 샘주라 님종 혁친보게 주마 많이 박은 님종 주민의 님종 말이 주마 많이 박은 님종 주민의 님종세는 다다 님종 쳐저걸 잠보와 zel렌라 내가 가서는 님종 제하들 딘내 님종가 가서 고추고 말이 타르토 조부 산지제 공바 톱고는 님종 주마마인 버토는 로고들이 마도제게 내가 그 님종 제하들이 갑len 트레네 갑살라 조보 조몬다고 카하차얀다고다 다 소소가 남무제와 쳔본다고 마롱부 진람도 저량다고다 단직된 감다다 탐질란 라마라 네처 사운드 아오 다는 님보 가야만도 삼니레 토니 님종을 제어할 때 님종 부도마 존 내가 삼보와 그 님종 내가 그 님종이 사냥이 다와 제에서 진이 철기보 가보 단득 본들이 사도 초랑이 띵 님종도 혀차를 요 말에 든좀 많이 방 님종 등 사보 주마 많이 버토니 주민의 님종을 줄을 제 타바리 그 냠네시 고두 당 코로도 남바견달라 땡 가서 그 로장고들
I'll begin, and I will do my best. If I'm at all unclear or overstate things or understate them or otherwise babble disconnectedly, I confess this to my root guru and to my Vajra siblings. If, on the other hand, anything I manage to say is of any help to anyone, I offer that to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It is important that we approach these four thoughts with the motivation of Bodhichitta. And in fact, in our context, our attitude needs to have really two aspects, both of which are vast. One aspect is the vastness of our purpose or motivation or intention, and that is the Mahayana aspect of our practice, Bodhichitta. The other aspect of our attitude is the vast means or methods of the Vajrayana. This path on which we are engaged, the path of a bodhisattva, requires great courage and tremendous open-mindedness. It also requires us to look at things in a particular way, to look at things in very long-term and very vast scope. What I mean by this is that each and every being that exists has countless times been everything to us, and we have been everything to them. Traditionally, we use the relationship of mother and child to describe this. This means that each and every being bore you, nursed you, fed you, and protected you, just as your mother did in this life. If you prefer, you can think of any other relationship. Each and every being has been your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife, your sibling, your child, everything. The important thing is to understand that the reasons, the emotional reasons for which you love the person you love most in this life apply equally in the greater and longer context of things to each and every other being. To the extent that it is valid for you to love another person, it is equally valid for you to love each and every other person. Because whatever you love about your mother or your partner or your friend has been repeatedly present in each and every other being. Now, the second point connected with this is not only that each and every being has been your mother, has been everything to you, but they all want the same thing. They all want to be happy. We may think we want this, that, or the other thing, but fundamentally we all want one thing, and that is happiness. As the great scholar Gendon Chupa famously said in the 20th century, ants only run in the pursuit of happiness. Regardless of the size of our body, whether we're a human being or a dinosaur or an ant, whatever we do for the same purpose. We do it because we are pursuing happiness. We want to be happy. This obviously also means that there is no being anywhere, there never has been and never will be, any being that wants to be unhappy. Beings may want things that we identify with unhappiness, but they don't. They want those things because they think it will make them happy. The third point, after the fact that all beings have been our mother and that all beings want to be happy, the third and crucial point is most of us, most beings, act in a way that is, to put it mildly, counterproductive. By which I mean that most of us mostly act in ways that are destructive to any possibility of happiness. As we'll see, the 10 good deeds or virtuous actions lead to happiness, and 10 forms of wrongdoing lead to suffering. But we don't engage, as we so often do, in the 10 forms of wrongdoing because we believe they're going to make us unhappy. We engage in them because we, frankly, stupidly think they're going to make us happy. In other words, in most cases, for most of us, our purpose in acting and our actions are in fundamental conflict with one another. We want happiness, but most of the time we do everything in our power to destroy every possibility of happiness. We have no real direction in our lives most of the time. We're like a sightless person wandering in a huge field who has no idea what direction they're facing, what direction they're walking in. So, these 3 points, that all beings have been our mother, that they all want to be happy just as we do, and that most of them, most of us, are engaged in acting in a way that is destructive of happiness and productive of misery. These 3 points have to be the basis of our motivation. We have to think, I am not practicing dharma for my own good alone. I am practicing dharma because I want to help everyone. That is the vast motivation of bodhicitta, the motivation of the Mahayana. The other aspect of our attitude is the vast method or profound method of the Vajrayana. And this requires acute faculties, by which I mean an acute understanding of the true nature of reality. Because it requires that we actually transform our perception, not just into impartiality, it must include that, but on top of that, the Vajrayana requires that we perceive our environment as a pure realm, as a pure and perfect realm of existence. That we perceive all men and women, all male and female beings as viras and dakinis. That we perceive our root guru as the Dharmakaya, Vajradhara, in person. That shift of perception is the essence of the vast means or methods of the Vajrayana. And as I mentioned, it's really intended for smart men and women. Doesn't matter whether you're male or female, but to practice Vajrayana, you have to be smart. Of these 2 aspects of our attitude, the Mahayana motivation of bodhicitta and the Vajrayana attitude of pure perception, the first, bodhicitta, is the most essential and therefore principally requires to be emphasized for our practice of these 4 thoughts or 4 contemplations. When we approach these contemplations with the motivation of bodhicitta, it is like having the best tack, the best bridle on a fine horse. Because if bodhicitta is really our motivation, then by contemplating these four thoughts, we will develop over time a sincere, a real desire or determination to be free. We all experience transitory flashes of determination to be free. These are not regarded as authentic because they're circumstantial. Therefore, when circumstances change, they vanish. So we call that fake determination to be free. For example, when you go through a painful breakup and you think, oh, samsara has no essence, it's true. Or some other event in your life causes you to grieve. Grief is real, but it is not the same thing as the determination to be free. Because you're grieving a specific set of circumstances, unpleasant as they may be. You have not resolved that regardless of circumstances, regardless of how good things may seem, they lack essence. So without that, you cannot, without that resolution, you cannot give rise to this determination. Without this determination, using grief or other emotional states as a substitute will not enable you to practice dharma authentically.
That's deri. Tanga so drink kapsa ta lodo number yeni ma hyokari. Then the lodo number ye say ate ta yin kani yongwa mari. Then the jarwe sumba ke ko denu sum Jude Chimbola Sobala Mandi Bakaya Yomari. Teni Denu Simja Nan Deni Tangdonda, Nidon La Sobazon, Hiekori, Sonkori, Chuki, Tangi Nikitoni, Sanjek Chu Song Yaring Asola. Then do that Teranga Gabs here the Tangdong Teni Hiekori. That Tangdon the Nidoni Teni Langara in the Zawani and Gara Yomari. Gara Zawani Mari, Kanzaga Nogardo, Sanjek Chu Song Road. Tenika, Jikpin, Jikjo Tundriki Chando called it. Gungi Pachi Tundri. Then Tarangan de Tandong Tini he called it. Then the Lodo number yes, Sayate, Nazog Jerto Tomonke Tindori, Tomonke. Then it Tomomaimba, that they are not Yig Jamroda, Simgini. Yakin do Deni Sazoga Kon Hindo call it. Then the Tomori. Tomondi Nimbajing Gogo Yori, Tomonga Lodo number yes. That Dela Tambo Tamjur Nikawa, Simataba, Corinime, Legend Seriateke, Yagatoni, here called it. Then Tereng also the Gangtoptok, Tamjur Nikawa, Simataba Ni, Nado the Sudo. Ganchi Tony Huayin. Then he Sanya Gapso Corini made and legendary Tony Huari. Then he tela Tambo, Tamjur Nikawa, Seriatela. Tambo, Tamjur Nikawa, the Chikha Mao Zone, Taraji, and Yora Jo, Tamjur Jobji, Dimba Malu, Rumboche, Seriat, and also here called the and the Gandu Yamba, the Chikha Maona. Nazo Gamalu to 2,000 call it, Ninga Chimbori. Ya Kadena Jiwa Lincho, Kadena Jiwa Lincho, did my Jiwa Lincho, did Aran Pomo, Karijiwa the Lincho Sana, Tagamari. Zawanin also the poverty Yomari. Leg Jison Rango, the Sanya Leki in the power the Zawanin Yomari. Tangazo and the karba mambo ke sonam chibol tin nga so ga mulurumbo chiri tawleri di mulurumbo chende Tashi na jo pe chang samjo goni xie ko diri te na ge ngo tarwa la samba ta chebar je chun jorwa la samba ta ni ge pe la samba ta chang ji chebar la samba ta ta tenru ge goni mambo ge sabji mambo yotang yori yana tata ngaso taranga kapsala ta jota pe ta changji samje goni tamjer ge mulurumbo che de kanju ni kanju ke kombo rindo samne ge ngaso ge samno tito ni tang ne lo jango le te a ta pe thola che hi gan do samne ge thoni ma ya wa se ngone tane ge te la yi chi timbo re ngaso believe so ta ko derki nimbo na yi chi se ya ta lodo namba ya kare na tekba 토미 parso kare nyamne se na tela yichi se ya de pe ke chembore nga so trobo ya bor cha go na yichi go ma se trobo ya bo cha ya yo ma re chon trobo de tembo cha ka ma re tare trobo na sa ni kha kha cha ro kare chon kare re se na chon tela yichi me ba re yichi ya bo ye che ge se ga na trobo de ngone tra ne lu thap ko trobo se ya de cha ne trobo de ga na ya lo me ba re ge chon la chol yichi na phale yichi zo kare tela tin na to phyo ne ba la tin ne Teni ngarang la pinto chimbo yongko yorwa teya nang giri ten de dambo ta tamjor ge ngazo ta tarwa ji yorwa jo tamjor job ji de mulu sarya de kanri sin ni ko le sin ta jo pe chang samje go ni ngazo hi yo de teni dambo tarwa ji sarya de kanri ke ni ngazo ni go le sin ta Makombe ne ji to ma ji ba na darwas Makombe ne ji de ji ga na chu de ko ka yo ma re wa nga so de long yo ma re Makombe ne ji to ma ji ba de go mo lo go song yo re wa nyar wa ye da ton ro ta la lo che ren la ta ne lo ta sang ji ji tong ba ko ba de da moham ji de moham ji ma ji ba de nga so 가레시 걸리로 추드버 고갑 다당아 소리 요리 다 냐르와르 제제소나 차장 그 동할 님치 녀던 친 코모 요라 치주 까마 찍다 드줄로 콤바 밀레게 되니 차장 그 동할 냥고들이 된달리 냐르와데라 참여지다 참여지다 니체 냥콜라서 보마보다 사니 쳐조고로 코르 동할나는 힘 거리 Then Nyarwa Jesone, Nyarwa Donharte, Drang Chu drop some Nick Choran the same cast, Kirovena, the Kielon Omar, the same Corantella, some not only Coca made a lachi, Coca Choran Zawan in the made. Nyarwa Jena, the Rika Chu said the Mokombari, Jenny. Yeda the Jesona, Tikonga Donhar, Chicken, Gomba, Nardabka. Lodra Tontrama bought the Choi Tibatam and Tongi Nico Mari. Garci Lama gave he the Sancho Samba Sama Tamjika and Napta, Kalita, Kala, those are the Choran Hoa Sayona. They Mipano Tarko Mari. Mipala Tangatam, Tai Namatamori. Garci Mipani Matana, Toala Yordong Zamri. Tina the member called it, Tana Patsing to call it. That tea to chute. Chicken combat don't hurt the to shoot the pie or to shoot Taylor, Lord Don Tramamble, Tigang and Trade Sunny, should really cock up your marry. Tangaso to the Jim, Messiva Mari, the Jess Sebaring, also Jacoli, Trunk Meba Jacoli, Jawalin Collie. That Tundril son of Tangoli. That dear Nanginga, Tundrula, Jake Samnotona, Longking, Mongbaga, Lomon Court you don't hurt, choose it on Macombs. Comba Yomari. Console Chusili gone see Hikomari. Chora Man and Project on Chora Tata Dewaji and Rona the Zena Corners of Hikamari. Tana Soso Nekanza Charbag Dondina Zo Hikamari. Tundru get top jaw when the day of Allah Chukari of the Kokabri. Yomari. That Tundru Nang then Sancho somebody Sumatam Jigan Roros in the Sonko ladies in the Ori that the Sonetan Kakari. Londro Tundro the Lunking Mombut Donharche. That you see the concommandova. You see the conquer your marry. Then, Lalo ne Rangu Lokdale Hepsari. Choose the Conco Mari, Lalo, Lalo Seriade. Choose the Conco Mari. Teana Yego Tsering La Tsering Sayade, Konas of Matsetela, Tsering Body, Kibori Tadu. La Tsering Body, Chukin in the kids on your Mari, choose the Conco Mari. Lokta Sanji Jitongba, Skopa de Dam Homji, Lokta Sanji, Lokta Jin, Sanji Tong, Sanji Mewa, Sanji Somanyoa. Teana Yokobane, Chona Wambo in Lama Tawari. Wambo in Lama Tawatan, the Lomba de Tata, Wambo in Lama Tawatamjila, Tap the Hiragogoni, Tap the Hiragogoni, sign language in the Changazon, the Seka Damato Jega, Takoba Seyatel. Nasoko Kuba Sayate, Struped Zomari, Kuba Sayate, Kata Jamewata, Nawaka Moavata, Chuki in the Nacho Gomatavate, Kuba Sala. Then the one boy in Lama Sama Jinsen, Chusi the Conco Mari. De Maimba, Naso, Tata Mudurumbo, Tobiora, Tateri, Mokomba, Neji the Machivane, Tak Nasoka, Mulute. Mulurumboche. Chu drumna drup choli, nina ni choli, tuna tu choli. So the wambo in la tsang deba, gokab yu deba, Pam Jorgan danza tog deba. Tan dendrike to dollar tog the thing also get true la multi true la say mando something can do hikatoni, then is some not on the Lord Jango.
The cookbag called la tapshi test zogosari. Sick nyimbo, they mena ding song. The sick la be tagidoa.
Lazoteri.
The four thoughts that turn the mind refer to four contemplations that serve to turn our minds away from investment in a samsara. And so basically they consist of repeatedly reminding ourselves of the truth. The source of these is the Buddha's teachings. We find references and descriptions of these four thoughts throughout the three containers, the Tripitaka and the Tantras. When we analyze the Buddha's teachings, we typically divide them into two categories, what are called definitive statements, or the definitive meaning, and indicative statements, or the indicative meaning. Of these two categories, the teachings on the four thoughts belong to the indicative meaning, or indicative statements. We can also divide the methods or techniques taught by the Buddha into common techniques, that is to say, techniques that are common to all vehicles of Buddha Dharma, and uncommon techniques such as taking refuge, generating bodhicitta, and so forth. The four thoughts are a common technique, although when we practice them, as I mentioned earlier, in the context of a bodhicitta motivation, they become an uncommon technique as well. The four thoughts are, and the order of them can vary a little bit with respect to the last two. First, the contemplation of the difficulty of acquisition of this, of our current freedom and resources. Second, the contemplation of death and impermanence. Third can either be contemplation of the causes and results of action. And the fourth, contemplation of the problem of samsara. And sometimes the order of those two is reversed, and the problem of samsara is contemplated third, and the results of actions are contemplated fourth. The way I'm going to do this is, since there are four of them and we have 4 sessions, I'm going to explore the first, contemplation of the difficulty of acquisition of our current freedom and resources. This morning, we'll talk about death and impermanence this afternoon, and tomorrow we'll go through the third and fourth. We need to begin our spiritual path in the Buddhist tradition with the first contemplation, simply because we need to value, to properly and accurately value what we are and what we have. Each of these contemplations protects us against a certain danger, we could say. Specifically, understanding how special, how wonderful, how tremendous the 18 attributes of our hard to acquire freedom and resources. Understanding this will keep us from wasting our life. We waste our lives when we believe that nothing matters. We also tend to waste our lives, even though we may believe in rebirth, when we think that, well, I'm a human being now, I'll probably be born as a human being next time. It's just more of the same. It doesn't really matter what I do. We lack motivation. We become unmotivated to change, unmotivated to grow. So it's important to understand that we are powerless to determine our next rebirth, except if we take control of our lives by choosing how we act. But unless we make conscious choices of how we act and how we live and how we think, we cannot assume and must not assume that we are going to experience the same tremendous opportunity that we do now. This is why another term often used for this juncture of freedom and resources is the precious human body. What gives us these resources is, first of all, that we have been born as human beings, and secondly, that among human beings, we are in a very, very special, very, very privileged position. We'll go through the rarity, the difficulty of acquiring these resources by looking at the causes of this type of birth, the proportion of precious human body holders to other beings, and analogies for the rarity and for the proportion. But the point of all of this is not simply to learn this stuff. We have to train our minds. It is not enough simply to read about these 18 attributes, their causes, and so forth, or even memorize. these things. The point is to believe in them. It's the same as our understanding of Buddha nature. You may have read about Buddha nature, heard about Buddha nature, liked the idea, sounds good, but if you don't believe in it, there's no point. The same way, if you learn the 8 of this and 10 of this and 5 of this and 5 of that, but you don't believe it, it's pointless. It's not going to do you any good. Knowledge without belief is untrustworthy. It's like somebody who is your friend but then isn't your friend. You can't trust them. They're not stable, they're not trustworthy. In this case, we have to learn to befriend our own tremendous opportunity. And the only way we can be a trustworthy friend to ourselves, to our own opportunity, is through believing in how extraordinary this opportunity is. If we simply hear it, we know the numbers, we can recite the numbers, but we don't believe it, we are untrustworthy. We are unworthy of our own trust. We have to ask the question, how did we get here? How did we land this tremendous opportunity of 8-fold freedom and 10-fold resources? But before we even ask what their causes are, we need to understand what this opportunity is. We can't skip ahead and just start studying why it happens or how often it happens, because we have to begin by appreciating in a heartfelt way its value. The first thing we need to understand about ourselves is that we have tremendous opportunity. We are not free from samsara, but within samsara, we have a comparative degree of freedom that is unexcelled. And this is the freedom to practice dharma. Here, we're not talking about being free from suffering, although that's part of it in some sense, but free from conditions that simply prevent the practice of dharma. As Arya Nagarjuna put it, this freedom is freedom from hell, preta state, being an animal, being a long-lived deva or god, being a barbarian, having wrong views, living in a world in which no Buddha has appeared, or having severely diminished faculties. So we're free from 8 states. And these 8 states, 4 of which are not human states, they're non-human, and 4 of which are human states. Freedom from these 8 states enables us, gives us the opportunity, the freedom to practice dharma. The first of these is hell. Nobody likes to talk about hell. Nobody likes to think about hell. We may not know too much about it. Hell, naraka in Sanskrit, is any state in which the constant suffering, it is not a human state, in which the constant suffering is so severe, so unremitting, that there is no possibility, no chance, no gap, no space, physically or mentally, to practice dharma. Preta, which appears to come from a word that meant prayita, or afterlife. We often call them ghosts, hungry ghosts. Pretas are beings who, regardless of how we may perceive them or not, perceive themselves as having bodies. And like our bodies, they require nourishment. They require water to quench their thirst and food to quench their hunger. The problem with pretas is they cannot acquire anything to drink, anything to eat. They will go for thousands of years searching in agony, in desperation, for water and food. And the rare occasions when a spiritual friend or spiritual teacher goes through the process of dedicating food or drink to a preta, they will be unable, in most cases, to swallow it because their throats are narrower than the point of a needle. And should they manage to swallow it, their bellies are as vast as a huge field, so they can't be filled. And even if it enters their belly, it immediately burns them, turns to acid or fire. That's on the rare occasions when they actually find something. And when they do, it's usually something like a monk will blow his nose or a nun will blow her nose and then think of the pretas. And then they will fight one another to the death just for a little bit of that snot. It's quite possible that we might be born as one of these. And it is absolutely certain, Lama said, that we have been in the past. The third state without the freedom to practice dharma is one we can see much of, or some of, and that is animals. The animals on this planet, for example, other than the human animal, which is considered a separate realm because of our ability to understand dharma, the other animals on this planet cannot understand dharma. You cannot say, well, you can say it, but you can't tell an animal to recite Om Mani Padme Hum. You can say it, but the animal is not going to do it because it simply cannot understand. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are bodhisattvas, male and female, who will sometimes take rebirth as animals. And they're an exception. But basically, if you're an animal, you can't understand dharma. And then the fourth non-human state that is without the ability or freedom to practice dharma is long-lived devas, or gods. These gods live so long and have so much fun that they either believe they're immortal and therefore they can do whatever they want, it doesn't matter, or they're so distracted by either their sense pleasures, the pleasure of their meditative absorption, or whatever it is. They're so distracted that spirituality to them, dharma to them, seems irrelevant. Why would you do that? You're having too much fun. So whereas the first three states are in different ways simply suffering too much to have the opportunity to practice, The devas are not suffering enough. Until they die, it's just fun, fun, fun. And therefore, there's no motivation. When we understand this, we're starting to understand part of what makes human life so precious. Part of it is that we're smart. Human beings are smart, but we're not having that much fun. And this brings us to the second set of 4 circumstances from which we are free. Now, among human beings, all human beings are free temporarily from those 3 lower states and being a deva. But there are 4 other conditions that must be present for our human life to be what we call precious or especially valuable. The first is that we are not barbarians. Now, this is a tricky term because I think in many respects, he didn't say this, I'm just saying this, I think we are really, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but barbarian in this case has a very specific meaning. It's a funny word, the barbarian in English, because of course it comes from the Greek thought that the foreign languages just sound like bah, 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 bah. And that's actually where it comes from. Barbarian in this case means to be born in a society where spirituality, dharma, is so disrespected, so hated, that there is no opportunity to gain contact with it. So it's a societal limitation from which we are somewhat free. The 6th thing from which we are free is having wrong views, having an incorrect belief system. And this is less societal than it is personal. Someone with wrong views is somebody who, although they're not born in a barbaric culture, nevertheless, personally holds the belief, such as the belief that nothing matters, the belief that experience ends with physical death, and therefore it doesn't matter what you do. And many, many people believe this. So that is having a wrong view. And if you're listening to this, you're probably free of that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this. The 7th is to be born, and the 7th is also a societal or planetary issue, to be born in a world in which no Buddha has appeared. So to be born in a world where in the recorded history of your species, while everything else, you may have everything else going for you, there's never been Dharma. No teacher has appeared. And the 8th one, again, is a personal obstacle. It is to have such diminished faculties that you are incapable of communication. And therefore, since you cannot communicate with other human beings, you cannot learn, let alone understand, the Dharma. You're separated by whatever the diminishment is. You're separated from, you're isolated from communication. So freedom from being in hell, being a preta, being an animal, being a deva, freedom from those 4 states without freedom, and freedom from being a barbarian. We're working on that one, I guess. From having wrong views. Yeah, we are. I said, really, Lama, we are barbarians. I mean, us, people who look like me. And he said, well, you're kind of like barbarians. And he was probably including himself. I wouldn't. Anyway, freedom from being a barbarian, having wrong views, being born in a world in which no Buddha has appeared, and having faculties diminished to the point where communication is impossible. So freedom from those limitations is what's called eightfold freedom. Sometimes we call those limitations states devoid of leisure. That sounds awfully understated to me. I think that we can't talk about hell and say it's just a state without leisure. It's much worse than that.
Tere?
Did?
Oh, that's that tere. Teni tatela darwa jis, tan yorwa jo seriate hiekore, tan yorwa jo seriate rangunin yorwanga de yingunin yorwanga zo hiekore. Ta rangunin yorwanga seriate teana yekyan, meni wuji wangbo chang lemta malo nela ti song. Meni seriate nga zoda me. 다다 된다 나히 동고 맨친이 처리한다 창대바 감쪽된지 물루 가서 된 요리 매니 요 된다고 요 멈박가르바다 추 마다르바다 던르케 사체게 연다고라 제마성와 추체게 요 로미카르바 다다 된다 산지네 된다고 진짜 가서 여우 다다다 추 달사게 여우 Tendrike la nga so ke jewa lang yo ba. Tendrike ngyor yo re. Ni ba. Wang bo yin la ma chang wa jor ma sang ba. Nga so wang bo yin la chir yin de chang wa. Cha chang ba. Go ta ba. Na hi ba. Chi ni de den ba. Tendrike ke me gen tong wa. Da je wang bo yin la jim chi cha chang chang de ba ye ke. Tendrike ma chang wa ri ma sang wa. Tendrike ke ngyor wa. Sumbanawari. Legenta law ne may lu top lemta law that chula Madevan Rawata Chu Mawa Rawata Mata Tendali change the Anna Gitiba Chimbota Sanga that chu Tendrike Rima Songa Lemta Malovari Masonga that Tendrike Gangasola and Jorio Bagtene Yabandaw. Yang Sanje song, Chu song, Tendri, Tendrike, Temba tela, Madivandawata, Tendricha Masawang, also Ne tela, Deba, Kuba, Sozoke, Yudeba, Tendrikan Yoribane, Rangun in Yoranga Lasoba, Sankor, that Tendrike, the take Jeba Tendrina Tartina, also the so Regan the try Traba in a Dena chocolate, that's so Hako Tapco, Naso Sozola, Kandrike Yula Dindo, Kandrike Demon, Chu drop a cock up, Kandriki Chando, Chu drop a cock up, Mewa Kandriki Rima Sondo. Then also a Hako Taba Sarkin, Sarposibo Hako Tabiate, Tapeki Chimbo Jigri. Teddy. Then Yingun in Yoranga, Seriate, that the so Tama you de Pinka Yomari. Then the Yingun in Yoranga de Gohori. Sanje Sonda, Te Jinjo, Sanje Sonda, Te Chusong, Temba Neta, Te Jinjo, Yism Hinitzewa, somewhat not at Sankoleri. The Yingun Church Sankoleri. Sanje song. Tang also Mulur Tendra may lu top Zamboke top Debake, Pink Yomari. Tang also Sanje combat to Zig Tapi. This Sanje song god. Sanje somba. Sometimes Sanje Mazone Tendrike. Garci Sanje Sona, take Chumasona, thing is a corner younger Tendrike to Mambo Seco. Sanje Mazone to Copa Mambota, Chazogolo, Tendrike Mambo Kichando call it. Tendru Mazone, Sanje song. Sanje song, take Chu song. Sanje song debat samje maram zoba sanje mai zo song tingin zala nyambar tse de ya song mayimba te ke chu song ta te ko sanje song te ko nyambar ya yo song na kampin ko maro ko na ma che bo tingin zala nyambar ya song de te te dorje de te amari da ja ga tomba dorje de na ngambar zoba sanje ba mazile teni ta te ke chu song le nga zo chu te la da ga te ka so la no ha ni ge chu nga zo la song ko le ndo chu che bo zhang yi ni ge chu zhang do de ni dong no ha ni ge chu nga se ya de chu de pe khe de ne jo gong bo re kap la ma do je ge nga ge ten ba de dar ke yo ma re de da no ha ni ga ge ten ba de nga zo la zo bo san je kha ja to ba so ne ro ma la ya nam ja ba re ze ne dong ba da dorji chang ge ko yin 대하나 이건 콜가데다 렌제 드라마가 소바 거리 옌데네 데네다 그 남자 말어제네 상하게 추 송요로 건게 대하나 이거 거로름 보지 산지니 반다고 거로름 보지 무슨 송 대게 상하게 추데 가서라 할레바게 달거로 할레바게 대인도 삼英文的等着给俺做了参考的，这时候还搞搞的，这个感觉给俺做了高级的领导上面的还搞他们呢，等的，等你俺做了谁公布些有呢，谁宣布些公布些有呢，大的连接他们的宣布啥个了哇？大起码俺的 top 些 top 高来考我的 top 干嘛的？大的连接俺 top 的告诉俺的宣布些啥上的这边的呢，基本有呢。ten rali jin coffee chimbo rana tari ngan di coffee de jimang en dan ka coffee ra ka mari tari coffee ra de ji bo yin thong sam ne tre bar den yon lu lu win de den thong karwa te na ye ka mulu de den ri che ne nga so ka kong bo kan ru ko kong lo ha ko kong bo de ha ko so na de nya ra bi chi ri ja la kong bo nga so da lo ke kap so lan de ne ngi na ne am na de se nya ra bi chi ndo nga zo ge se sa ma zhe ne ko yo ya le da che zo ge lo po ba ge to ba den ri ke mang bo ye lo mang bo la zhe ni ko pa yo ya le da ri nga zo cha san sa top so le de se gong bo le chong kan nan ro bu go ma re wa na za jang go le de ko kap de din ai dan di se him bo le san cha chang ma zang wa zo to gen do te se de la twa chen mo do ten ra li chen mulu de den ru ke gong bo yan ba de ha ko na te pe pyu so se chi ge wa dong da de re pe pyu se chi go dong da ro de re de ni san je song de chu song ten ba ne yang de ra li chen chu song na ten ba de yang tong tong ten ba de ma ne na pin ke yo ma re nga zo de da ten ba de pe me se ba yan ren bo ta kar zang san je tong za ni song ko ran di san je di kar ban de la karwa zambo sanje nga so de la melu lang wa ta melu sanje song da de chu song tenba ne da de ji song nga song yo to ko le yo ne de ni nyam ni se ya ko ka ra ko le tenba ne da de ji yin jo yin sem ning ne ze wa yo song ne de ne sam ba da ze wa go ne da yin den ri ke go ne nga so le ji song zen ne de ne ko nga so la sanje ke den ri ne chu jong ko lo ko wa
de gendum pa number ke Lama dan gendum pa number ke nga zo la sewa segyo
zewa yin chol le ko ro de den ri ke nga zo la de zewa chen bo dan de yin jor nga ro la de ya ran yi de de nga zo de ti ko kap de top de ore ta ti ko kap de chu la ma dang zo hol dan do he je de na ko kap de chu la ma dang nam ke karba mambo ne lin je ni be se de chu la dang ne yok ma yo se be ju ji se him bo ji so se do la lo bo la 피니지는 야보 힘보게 소존 다 대성 거. 다 대달이 이제 담겨 좁지 참부 물론 못 되는 거 소리 된요리. 다 대게 거. 다 대달이 이제 양 용된주 대인다는 텔레망서 해거래. 리치 로임 뭐컴 남바지단 차르송 지점 뭐컴 남바지 라서 방아서 그 루틴 데이터 로본 데이터 다당아서 창다 창견 바리. 다소 다때 테 제바나 소소가 삼노 땅나 데니 갈레 냐나 데니 하고타브레 투도 드루윈 하고데 오 디고네 데테히데 데테페차 디나 워르네 데르히가 짜네 찍다고도 오서 펠로 자탑레 팽카레 데인데 대아장이 교반야 다 데인라리 진짜 담절 좁지 데벤다 진로게 데나 담절 좁지 데벤물리 저는 히에코레 다때 다 드르리 상황아서
The first aspect described of our current state as inhabiting precious human bodies is what we are free from, what we don't have. The second aspect is what we've got. If the purpose of this contemplation is in part to help us appreciate and properly value our lives, it is important not simply to think of these things in the negative sense of, well, we're not in hell, well, we're not a preta, and so on. We have to appreciate what we've got. And in this sense, we have 10 things. 5 of these resources are called intrinsic or personal, and 5 of them are called extrinsic, environmental, or societal. To some extent, these are the antitheses of the 8 things we're without. But it's looking at it in a positive way, as not just what we are fortunately temporarily free from, but how much we have. The 5 personal resources are, first, we have all been born as human beings. Second, we've been born in what's called a central country. Now, a central country is defined in Buddhism. Of course, many nations refer to themselves as the central country. But in Buddhism, a central country is defined as a land in which the 4 types of Buddha's followers, male and female monastics and male and female lay disciples, are present. So, for example, when the first Buddhists came to, or the United States, or the first Americans became Buddhist, it became a central country. The value of being born in a central country is obvious. It gives you the opportunity to encounter the teachings. It's nevertheless considered intrinsic because it was where you happened to take birth or come to reside. The third intrinsic resource is that your faculties are sufficient to enable you to communicate with others and learn and understand. The fourth is that the direction of your actions is not counterproductive. The direction of your actions means your lifestyle, that you are not living a life that is so antithetical to spirituality that it simply destroys any opportunity you might otherwise have to grow. And the fifth intrinsic resource is faith. That you have faith, the traditional state is neladepa, that you have faith in those things that are worthy of faith. That you have faith in fit objects of faith. So those 5 resources, to be born human in a central country, to have sufficient faculties, to be living a lifestyle that is not antithetical to spirituality, and to have faith in Dharma. These 5 are intrinsic. Now, longer texts will provide a great deal of detail about all of these, and it's worthwhile exploring that. But the point is really twofold. The point is, first of all, to value your own situation, to value everything that is present that makes up what you call you, to value that, to honor that. And the second point is to scrutinize yourself. Do I have faith? What is my lifestyle? How am I living? And so on. So those are the points. Now, as essential as those 5 intrinsic resources are, they are by themselves insufficient. There needs to be 5 environmental. Oh, now we have to start all over again. Sorry. Tom asked me to make fun of you, and I've been neglecting it, and I'll try to do better. By themselves, they're insufficient without a certain environment, a certain societal, physical environment. The first of these extrinsic or external resources is that a Buddha appeared in the world in which you are born. Now, Buddhism talks about infinite inhabited worlds, and most of them have the equivalent of human beings, which doesn't mean that they look like us necessarily, but that they have the same circumstances spiritually that we do. But in many of them, there is no Buddha. In their recorded history, everything else might be there, right? Kind of intelligence, curiosity, all of that, but there's just been no Buddha. So the first, most important resource is that we got one. I'll return to this, but we got one. The second thing is that the Buddha not only appeared, but he taught Dharma. There are said to be worlds where Buddhas achieve Buddhahood but don't teach. They remain in samadhi because the circumstances are not there. So our second resource is not only did the Buddha appear on this planet, but he taught Dharma. The third resource is that it survives. We can't take that for granted. Dharma will not last forever on this world. And once it's gone, it's gone. Even if you live in a world where a Buddha appeared and taught Dharma, if the Dharma dies out, you can't get it back without another Buddha. The fourth result is that the Buddha's followers are sufficiently numerous or prominent that they're able to attract your attention. So even if the Buddha appeared, the Buddha taught Dharma, and the Dharma hadn't died out, if all Buddhists were invisible, we'd have no way of hearing about it. And the fifth and necessary fifth is that they're kind enough to share Dharma with us. The teachers will teach. Because it's quite possible that a Buddha could appear in the world, could teach the Dharma, it could survive, there could be lots of Buddhists, but they could be mean and not willing to teach you. That's not happening. Pretty much. There are more worlds without Buddhas, far more worlds without Buddhas than with them. There are far more worlds where Buddhas don't teach than where they do. There are far more worlds at any time where there was Dharma but isn't anymore. There are far more worlds where the practitioners of Dharma are so few that they can't be found. We are extraordinarily fortunate in this world. Between 2,500 and 3,000 years ago, the exact date is constantly being revised, Buddha Shakyamuni was born and achieved, at the age of 36, perfect awakening at Vajrasana, Bodh Gaya. We know this happened, we know where it happened, and we know that it happened. Not only that, but after his awakening, he taught. And not only did Buddha Shakyamuni teach Dharma, he taught Dharma that even almost all other Buddhas won't teach. He not only taught the indicative meaning of Dharma, he taught the definitive meaning. He not only taught what we call sutra, or discourse, but he taught tantra, or transmission. For example, he went to Sri Lanka, and on the peak of Mount Shripada, formerly known as Adam's Peak, he taught, in the form of Vajradhara, the 5 noble disciples. And in that way began the tradition of what we call Tantra, or Vajrayana. He reappeared later in the form of Guru Rinpoche, Guru Padmasambhava, to widely propagate these teachings. Almost no Buddhas teach Tantra because the times, the societies are unfit for it. So not only do we have these 5 extrinsic resources, we really have a 6th. We don't call it that, but we really have a 6th, which is that Buddha Shakyamuni taught the Vajrayana, that he reappeared as Guru Rinpoche and propagated it wildly. That's a whole separate thing. That's a game changer for us. Now, we have to, the point of all of this is that we not take ourselves, our situation, our resources, our opportunities, our freedoms for granted. We must not take any of this for granted. And this is something that we can appreciate rather more easily under our current circumstances, because we've lost a lot of stuff that we took for granted. Until this year, eating whatever you want in a nice restaurant was something we could do. We could go out for coffee and get really delicious coffee. We could order exactly what we wanted, whenever we wanted, and it wasn't a big deal. We just thought, yeah, I live in a country where I can do that. But now we've lost it. Now we think about the delicious food that we used to eat regularly and can't now. We treasure it. If somehow the circumstances come together that we can eat what we love to eat most, we don't waste it. We eat it. We don't let it go stale. We don't throw it out. We eat it, and we eat it all. If somehow the circumstances come together for us to have that particular type of coffee drink that we crave as an individual, we drink it. We don't waste it because we don't take these things for granted. Well, that's how we need to live our lives. We must not take our lives for granted. We must not take ourselves for granted. We must not take our society for granted. And the purpose of learning the 8 things that we're free from and the 10 things that we have is so that we not take any of this for granted. Now, there's more. For example, in the omniscient Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Qualities, Palto Rinpoche's Words of My Perfect Teacher, Jomgon Luther Tai's Torch of the Definitive Meaning, there are an additional set of 16 things that we need to be free of. So if you have access to any of those 3 books, it's good to learn them, because those are things that within the human state that we do need to be careful to avoid, that we can slip into.
다 빼거네 담전이 가와래 양 너드 세키바이나 빼거네 당가서 때빼데 고뇽들이 단 너나 롱디오리 롱디다 로본로드 인사요 잠소 체리인 야행 보가림바 렌주 많이 캔다니까 sonso 다 잠소 쳔본 타 잠소 나게 빼 잠소 쳔볼라 잠소 협되네 러버 롱아히 매매와히 잠소 그 토드네 냐행 보가직바 행 보가직바 진리요나 다 잠소 디 토드네 행데 샬롱고 로란데 로롱고 너란데 너롱고 상란데 상롱고 로란데네 중지자면 고 도모 탑레 던르케게 행된데 이렇게 인데 요리 다에나 데 오거 로발 롱아데 로자리 나니 테나 탱르레 콘총거요 다네 따반 총디나 코 보아나나 답렉 디마그 치세카리 데마리 로자리는 코 남카라 타렌 총거데 야나 행텔라 로버트 소르지게 셈요 마리 로버트라 행용지게 메요 마리 데인데 다데 치세바리 저 참참자 치파 외장 다른 물때 그 톱공그레스 물토바 텔레콤바리 손들이 다 물토바 빼고니 너르디바기잖아 되는 가서 그 물때 같이 고사리다 물때 레하고 톱사리 당 말이 삼네 당 가서 그 링지 톱 물때 간두게 베뷰시 고산도 삼네게 베뷰 로바시 고사도서 베뷰 야보시 고산도 삼네게 단두기 되거나 당 가서 베뷰 야보를 담배출라 종거로 대리 대라리 진짜 배차야야나 장 레모 야보 장 월배 잠보 플라이트 요발라 세르망아 저거 빈저로 깜보 깜장리들 빠라강 장을 담나 장을 차세 바래베 대양 레레서 장을 차세 바래라고
나 데라 카딘시야 요레 데 몸보 고뇽와레 are they cooked or not? Those beans.
It's not cooked.
Not cooked. Okay.
다 든르게 대양 레레선 야세크리 삼거리 저 톱들 장을 대레장 물르는 보치도 톱가 송들이 당가서 되니 그가 톱야게 탑히오사 말이야 든르게 갈래 가버려 대 출라 당지메와리 다대 빼가 고니 이게 바리 다 대라리 진짜 장그 고니 자이게잖아 다 장거고니 자이기잖아 나서데 다 냐르발라 사침보고 더점이나 예달라 강가롱게 세마참 돈로란 창가가 바마참다 대안하게가 멀어 세모된게 더점 좀된게 세모된게 더점 마냥 다 든르게 장가 마냥 대엔라 진짜 라다 라마예미 나이고로 걸레 denro 등인로 다 대엔라게 장가게 때는 가서라 마냥 뜻소서요리 이알가 돈로 레게한테 반토로 마냥 같이도 돈로를 때는 장가가 바마 잠조데 든르게 다 잠조 레나나 간디게 돈로요리 뭔데는 용용리 치용용 세모된 거 더잠조데 당 가족의 세모된 거 더잠마리데 좀된데 그 세모된 거 더잠제 빼야오리 다 대랑 가족은 디토 더 파테는 문도 더는 거 따야면은 더요리 더데 다 남카다 더데 가 파미트 속거로 와테리 대하나이게 다 니모가 karma든 치모 대안하게 그 라를 니모가 karma든 치 라마연은 치모가 karma라서 봐 든르게 그 장가 그거니 야요래 대인도 다저배 장성 그거니 다 든르게는 가서 그 물론 뭐지 톱 공커요 배 깔래 가버리 대인도 디 물론 뭐지 대 간르게 톱버리 세나 엄마 손음 사반 드레버게 빈지 잡아 잠세게 담절 물루 토바데 포고 토아 마엔데 손음사분 제베 송들이 포고 토아 저포 진보다 포구보다 장종 종보게 톱고요 말이 당하마 손음사 추게와 야보 드럽 츠텀 넘버 타바게 송 츠텀 넘버 타바게 송 야레가 물루름 보지 츠텀 물루 톱고나 츠텀네 초드 저바 미 송들이 츠텀 세야데 나 잭니 나가 용조 파처니 츠텀데라 송자 망보요리 나제 송토나 츠텀데라 피용 삼제 마자바 히고는 휴마타바 유고는 유마타바게 피용 삼제 마자바 가솔 츠텀 나올리 데 송야레 더 송라긴 드레버가 당가서 물르름 보제 탑코 요러와 데인데 다저베 장다 장 망보가 고네 물르름 보제데 가솔라 탑코리아 데라 normal lane langton loba nagi re masangwa ta nga so normal lane rawala lab yuna normal na lab chane pa nana lem du ta chu normal lab da se de kare ko jena khon je mewa laba tongba leba nagi re masangwa nga so ge tamjer je mulurum boche normal le je hyand ne je kon bu gen mulurum boche ta chuzu so masangwa chula ta ma yawa ke je nyen 치 대한항의 그 치추 karma 같이 곰톰나 게와 담비추 게와 드럽자다 라퍼드 산초그 셈 곰자다 대한항의 그 상하게 람냠스 린자다 다 든르게 가서 출라 마당와 돈이 다 고거리 마도 제게 다 두지 마다발래 거와 데 추즈서 마상와 공부 연바다 하고나 세 공부 연바다 하고나 냐차 히커와 다 가서 다니 롱반데 세테 빼 무타네 세 냐라 히면도 같이나 마가베진나 마 요야리 마도 제게 야 냐야도 소야 송조 히혀 말이 대한항이 마상와 근데 현대네 저 공부 연삼네 근데 히고네 당내 자네게 야 린체 동 린이 야낭니 단데 현대네 니 까와히 린도 공부히 린도 녜다 다리 린제 톱 물르등에 투사라 마당 삼니 담자 양니 양듯이 담자 양니 양듯이 지네 니 마코나 아케 나소놈 사본 데버리 니 마코나 코카나 마코나 마코 삼니 야제제비 데 추게와 드럽자다 삼노 동저도 검자저다 산초그 셈고 냠린 세야고 세야 고갑 아이 나데 고갑세 떠먹니도 마성와 너니 신제든 라라마 공조 라마가든예 공조가 가든예 소남사분 데버리 삼니 야 쪽쪽이 양 많은 평구를 니는 동지나 양가친동 삼노를 당기는 양이 공조 그래 대하나 예위는 드르베는 삼노 동동은 냥든 신의 예와메 바리는 데니 삼노 동동나 데니 뱀메세바 할레바리 대인도 다다 나저 송도 자세 겨와라게 담전된 현대니 벌까 기부동도 토벌잖아요 간데 토벌져봐요 갈때 나다 핀바마좀 신이 양단 저와 가는 종 신이 가는 게를 희말이지 다다 걸리된다 대인들이 이제 자생을 저 토미게 송도 담저 지치니까 톱는데 다긴 코른 솔레 드라자스 년다 친데 예와메 봐 년섬 공바 자세라니 년 친 예와메 봐 당에 공게 담저 지치 조어젠다오 던르키 니어리 다테 대땡에 추즈 섬마상 삼네 던르키 삼노 동고레다 대하나 얘가 고 담저 물론 보제데 랭니니 로홀레다 랭니니 랭나 탈버트젠 른데인데 게데 니나 고 득바 드브지가 른데 게데 건지 요보 른데 예 송들이 대한
데 도메게 송데 닌센 마레 년바당 삼바당 곰바솜
년섬 곰바리 년치 말이 년섬 곰바리 대응에 나랑 가도 근저바리 있으면 코너기 때문에 대 년치 예와메 밖에 삼노 땅거들이 리 년 샘곰바 자세라니 님시 말이 되리 대인도 올라서 된리게 돈이 땅아 속에 삼노 땅거제데 백개 쳔보리 존에 다 동계워치라 닌딘 서야데 산제가 가서라 협찬 도송야들이야
암절라 년 샘곰 솜당 닌센 곰바데 다우다우다
올라서
So the first part of the contemplation of the difficulty of acquisition of our current freedom and resources is the identification of our Eightfold Freedom and 10 resources. The second part is to contemplate the difficulty or rarity of their acquisition. And traditionally, we do so in three ways. An examination of the causes of such acquisition, the use of analogies for the rarity, and an assessment of the proportionality, the proportion of beings who have this resource. Now, because the most important of these is obviously an understanding of the causes, I'm going to leave that until we've gone through the analogies and the proportions. There are two main analogies traditionally given for the rarity of a precious human birth. The first of these appears to come originally from the writings of Arya Nagarjuna, although possibly from the sutras in which the Buddha taught. The analogy is this. Imagine an ocean the size of, let's say, the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, floating somewhere on the surface of that multi-thousand-mile wide ocean is a yoke or a life preserver, a piece of floating wood with one hole in the middle. Living in that ocean is a turtle. The turtle is blind. The turtle has no intention to stick its head through the hole in the yoke or life preserver. It only surfaces once every 100 years. Obviously, the yoke has no intention of any kind, so it's not looking for the turtle. The chance that coincidentally that turtle will stick its head out of the water and manage to stick its head into or through the yoke or life preserver is greater than the chance of being born with a precious human body. The other analogy is simple. Imagine taking a handful of dried beans. Doesn't matter what kind of beans they are. Peas, cannellini beans, whatever. You have a handful of dried beans, not cooked ones. I checked on that. You throw them at the wall. Why you would do this, I don't know. Obviously, somebody must have done it because the Buddha mentioned it. The chance that one of those dried beans will stick to the wall is greater than the chance that you will be born with a precious human body. Now, they have to be dried beans. Obviously, Lama said if they're cooked beans, well, then some of them are going to stick. You know. So those are analogies, the turtle analogy and the beans analogy. Now let's look at proportions. We think that there are loads and loads of people because there are 8 billion of us now on this planet. And so we think that there are lots of us. Think about how many more other species there are, just that we see. There are something like, 1,000 species of spider alone. Think about multi-thousands, I think. Think about think about the number of ants in an anthill compared to the number of people walking over that anthill. Now, these are things we can observe, but there's far more that we don't see. The number of beings in hell, what we call hell or Naraka, in any given world system is equivalent to the number of dust motes in an entire country. The number of pretas is far less, much, much less. It is only the number of sand grains in the Ganges River. The number of animals is less than that. It's the number of grains of barley or whatever, malt and whatnot, in a huge industrial vat of beer. I don't know why they always use beer as an example for everything, but, The number of humans is the number of dust motes that settle on one of your fingernails. Now, normally we don't think, Lama said, that we have dust on our fingernails, but the Buddha, being the Buddha, knew that we did. And now science confirms it, that if you look microscopically, there are dust motes and mites as well on your nails. The number of asuras, which means not gods. Sura is a synonym for deva or god, so asura means not gods, non-gods, is roughly the number of stars you can see on a clear night on an unpolluted planet. The number of devas, gods, is the number of stars you can see during the daytime. So, we may think that 8 billion humans on this planet alone is a lot, but they're very, very, very few human beings compared to other beings. And among those, how many of us actually have full eightfold freedom and tenfold resources? Now, the reason for this proportion, the reason why precious human rebirth is so rare is very simple. Precious human rebirth is not an accident. It is not a random event. It has a very specific cause. And as a great Tibetan master once put it, you don't get to be born human by being a tough guy. Being a tough guy. Now, this is the other thing about Tibetan analogies. If they're not talking about beer, they're talking about tough guys. So you don't get to be born human by being a tough guy. And tough guy also has a connotation of being clever and success and, the only cause of human birth in general is consciously adopted moral discipline, shila or tsutram, to actually consciously choose some kind of moral discipline. So if you have been born a human being, you must have done that. To be born with a precious human body, to be born as a human being with access to and interest in dharma requires two other elements in addition. The moral discipline has to be there. Without that, human birth is not possible. Nothing else can do it. But in addition, you have to have accumulated merit, and you have to have the aspiration to encounter dharma. So moral discipline, or shila, merit, or punya, and aspiration. These three things must be present. So we can infer with certainty that we did these things in the past. And if we are not doing them now, if we are wasting our lives, if we're wasting our time, if we're not making aspirations, we're not accumulating merit, and we're not leading good, ethical lives, it is idiotic to assume that we are going to be reborn again with this opportunity. If somebody understands this, believes this, and does not make any effort to lead their life accordingly, they are as dumb as somebody who sails to an island covered with jewels, ready for the picking, and leaves that island with empty hands. In fact, it's far worse than that. So the point of understanding this is not to take our lives for granted. Because only if we don't take these things for granted will we not waste our lives. We need to remember that every minute counts. Every minute, every moment of meditation, of cultivating bodhicitta, of Vajrayana practice is worth it. Every minute is worthwhile. And the reason for that is that we are going to die. We know that. We know that we are, in the greater scheme of things, about to die, but we like to put it saying just, we're going to die. We know that. So we cannot take our lives for granted. We cannot take our time for granted and waste it. We are so spoiled in this nation at this time. We throw so much food away into the garbage because we take it for granted. We can't do that. We can't do that with our lives. We cannot throw our good human lives into the trash. We need to actually push the envelope a bit. We need to go beyond our comfort zone in our diligence. For example, when it comes to how much we sleep. If we can get to the point where every time we wake up, we try not to go back to sleep, but we, even if it's just, say, 100 Om Mani Padme Hums, and we push that envelope, we can eventually get to the point where there's no longer any fluctuation in our awareness between day and night. And to say the least, that is something worth attempting. Shantideva wrote in his Bodhicharyavatara, this freedom and these resources are so hard to acquire. If I fail to make the best use of them, given their rarity and given how much power they give me. How could I possibly imagine that I would acquire them again? And as the Bodhisattva Tome said, it is the practice of a child of the victors or a bodhisattva to listen, think, and meditate about Dharma, on Dharma, constantly, through the recognition that this body that they possess currently is a great ship that they can use to cross the ocean of samsara. And therefore, Lama said, they will practice assiduously without fluctuation between day and night. Oh yeah.
Oh,
다 롯살.
턱지치. 다 배워버리죠. 땡게.
Thank you.
오, 소난다예, 담제, 세바니, 돈네, 니베, 라나, 반제, 제가 난제, 발란, 조바, 세베, 조렌, 로와, 요, 게완다예, 제오고, 소나, 이게, 조조, 소나 이제 레정외 담바 근이 도바르요 산조 셈네 rum보지 마지 바나 지저 지바 냠바 메바 당공네 공도 발와쇼 셈지 담지 대다 덴저르제 겐로 담지 따도 동바르요 산조 숨바 강다 사르요 대다 근제 몰람 저바요 선제르제 전제 담베가 절근드자 단달랭바이 사제 메존르 상아주 시게 zon다 자베 자지요 Lazo, Tojichi. Thank you, everyone. Oh, yeah. It's lunch time. I can't go on. Kala Henta Jutio. Lazo. Kala Yabu did that.